Everyone. We're not officially starting yet. As you know, Facebook usually needs 1 or 2 minutes to catch up with the live stream. In the meantime, welcome. Let's see if the chat functions work for everyone. I want to know where you come from, where you're currently sitting. So I'll start first. I'm Sandra, Austrian, sitting in Portugal, Lisbon. So where are you joining us from today? I'm very curious. Romania. Looking at some of the last names, I think Italy is present here as well. France, Germany, Italian in Tokyo. Wow, what time is it in Tokyo right now? Moldova, Portugal, 9 p.m. So it's a good night webinar session. Okay, Basel, Switzerland, fantastic. Vienna. This is very international today. Okay, good. We have 1 more minute to go. I have to warn you, the 4th module is the most intensive module out of all of them. And we will have, for the next 2 hours, 447 slides to go through. And 2 more people from Vienna, fantastic. Good, 2 p.m. sharp, let's get started. And I know some will join in the first 15 minutes as they usually do. So welcome now officially to the 4th module of our 2nd edition of the open webinars. 4th module of the 2nd edition means that this is our 17th webinar out of 18. Tomorrow is the last webinar in Polish, which means that Career Angels have delivered for job seekers affected by the coronavirus almost 18 times 236 hours of recordings and webinars completely free of charge. Oh, and we have Singapore joining. Welcome. So if you join for the first time, quickly, please do take notes. The presentation will not be made available, but the recording will. Today will be interactive with exercises, and you can ask questions by using the chat. And if you are joining us live on Facebook, use the comment section, and your questions will be transferred to the chat here on Click Meeting. After the webinar, you will be invited to join one of 2 groups, either LinkedIn and or Facebook. You send a contact request and Marcelina will verify that. And mentioning Marcelina, almost all of you have been interacting with the email address webinar@careerangels.eu. Behind that email address is Marcelina, who has in the past 8 weeks sent personally over 2,000 emails to make sure that you don't miss homework, that you don't miss important messages before or after the webinar, etc. And because today is the last time, if you want to say thank you for patiently, systematically, and in a very disciplined manner sending emails and being in touch with you, please do say thank you to her by email. And this is also possible thanks to Anna, who is in charge of the Polish edition of this open webinars. She has now delivered more than 14 hours of webinars, and tomorrow will be the last one at 10 a.m. I also have to say a special thank you to, in the meantime, over 20 people who have donated probably now around €700 by PayPal or transfer. And thanks to those donations, as you know, we are crowdfunding this edition. Thanks to them, the 2nd edition has been possible. And also thanks to Click Meeting, the platform we are using for this webinar. And they have contributed by giving us their tool free of charge at a value of €600. So Click Meeting, thank you very much as well. My name is Sandra. I started working as an executive search consultant in 2002 in Budapest, working for Central and Eastern Europe, and then moved to Warsaw, Poland. In the meantime, I worked in sales and marketing in, among others, Latin America. And when you combine sales and marketing and what you know about executive search, and that was something that I discovered for myself, combining those two when you combine those two paths, you can naturally then help candidates move around the job market. And that's why June, it was actually exactly 10 years ago, June 2010, I founded Career Angels. We had our first client in June 2010. And ever since, we've helped more than 5,000 people across Europe and about 5% of those outside of Europe when it comes to the career management and job search. Now, what I want to highlight here is that, yes, combining my experience from executive search and marketing and sales helps candidates, but that is not enough. And here I want to talk a little bit about our methodology. Because of how we work, we collect actual reactions of more than 5,000 headhunters and almost 20,000 decision makers. What does that mean? Then everything we share today, and we have shared in the past in the previous modules, is not based on our own personal professional opinion or experience. It is the sum of about 20,000 people. And again, not what they declare, but what they actually react to. I had mentioned in the past, for example, certain recruiters declare that the CV must have a photo or must have a date of birth, but they do react to CVs without a photo or without the date birth. Yes. So we started collecting and analyzing data in 2012 and have been doing ever since. Why is that so important? And again, I actually had a situation yesterday where a client shared with me the reaction of a recruiter who said, listen, you're over 50, probably even over 55. You will not find a job, especially now. So I do believe that this executive search consultant shared their career advice with the best intentions at heart. But what you need to remember when you listen to only one person, they share their advice, their perception from their own experience or preference or opinion, and they do not represent the entire market. That's why it's so important to look at data. And when you do ask somebody for advice, make sure you ask for career advice that is within your target group, to have the impression and feedback from somebody that you actually want to be attractive to as a candidate. And if it's HR, recruit, etc., career advisor, make sure to check their source of data. Why is that so important? Especially in the market that is so dynamic as it is now, especially even more dynamic with the pandemic. Data will show you that it very often contradicts intuition. And I think we've proven that in the last 3 modules. Now, one of the data points that we have decided to follow is what's happening on the job market in terms of posted online job ads. And let me just get there right away. The number of published job ads shows on LinkedIn shows us a direction of where the job market is heading. And here we have 18 countries that we tracked from week 13 to week 24, which started yesterday. And you can see that overall, the job market from LinkedIn, 1.3 million, that is a third of the job ads have basically disappeared. Does that mean that all of those recruitment processes and all those job posts have disappeared entirely? No. It means that part of them was probably moved to cheaper local job boards. Some have decided to save costs again and try to recruit somebody through, for example, their own employees, etc., etc. But again, even if it was the reason to move away from LinkedIn cost efficiency, that's also already a signal about the job market. So here it's sorted from Ukraine down to Italy, minus 47%, Germany, minus 46%. We then decided to extend it to 36 countries. And here you see the differences between last week and this week. And overall, 36 countries, we do see an increase of 3%, which is a good trend overall. So it is slowly improving. Okay. When you have a job market that is very employer driven, you need to be even more careful in terms of how to approach your own job search. This is how we then also had designed those 4 modules. Module number 1, we talked about defining your goal and your unique selling proposition. In other words, how to position yourself as a candidate and how to formulate that, how to identify what makes you better, different, unique on the job market. The second module was all about preparing CVs and optimizing your LinkedIn profile. Here we talked about CVs for humans, CVs for ATS, applicant tracking systems, and preparing a LinkedIn profile for both the human and the LinkedIn algorithm. The third module was about the 4th step of the job search strategy, which was to use all 4 channels. The channels were how to network, how to use network when looking for a job, how to approach your potential boss directly, how to make a list of headhunters, and how to apply to job ads. And now, once you do that, once you contact dozens of companies and headhunters, here a question on the chat: can we get access to previous modules recordings? Yes, we have a dedicated YouTube channel where you can find the recordings, and Marcelina will send them later on as well after today's webinar. So once you contact those 4 channels, as an inevitable result, you will generate interest on a job market, which means you will have interviews. As a quick reminder, the most effective channel is with 45.67% direct approach, meaning contacting your potential boss directly, 29% networking, 15% executive search firms, and 10.33% job ads. During the last module, we also discussed KPIs, and as a quick reminder, we said an average response rate to expect when contacting headhunters or companies, your potential bosses, is 30 to 50%, and the interview rate is 5 to 10%. So let's say, because we talk interview today, if you have an interview rate from 5 to 10%, you contact 50 headhunters in the country and 19 potential employers, you would end up having anywhere between 7 to 14 interviews. If you contact 90 potential employers with a 50% response rate, that would then result in 4.5 interviews if you have an interview rate of 5%, or 9 interviews if you have an interview rate of 10%. If you play that then further, we said there was something like 2nd level inbox management where you contact the alternative decision maker. You would have another 4.5 interviews and another 9 interviews. And if you play that along, you will end up with anywhere between 2.5 and 5 interviews from headhunters, and anywhere between 9 and 27 interviews with potential employers. That is a lot of interviews. So it's important to get it right. Now, question here, it might seem an obvious question, but let's try and see. What would you say? What is the goal of an interview? And in the meantime, hi Belgium and hi Spain. Thanks for joining. So what is the goal of an interview? Okay, I see that nobody's typing. I think we have one person decided to type. Don't be shy, there's no right or wrong answers. Generate interest, to go to the following step. Okay, I've seen 2 more people are typing, 4. I'll give you a minute. To assess the candidate, to get a job. Distinct myself from competitors. One more, there are probably many steps. To go to the following many steps. One of the following steps: to check the match, clarify expectations. Well, actually here it would be very reasonable to ask, what is the goal of an interview for who? For the candidate or for the recruiter? But we obviously talk all the time from the candidate's perspective. I'll answer what the goal of the interview is a little bit later. In the meantime, let's look at the interview stages. We have a before interview stage, a during interview stage, and an after interview stage. So let's look at it step by step. When we look at the before stage, what we want to do is actually get invited. So it might surprise some of you. It's not that difficult to get invited to an interview. There are a lot of candidates who don't even respond to invitations for an interview. And my recommendation, especially if you're actively looking for a job, check your spam folder. 29 to 34% of our candidates, so when we recruit to Career Angels, they do not reply to a positive response that they've been invited to join the recruitment process. And here, what's worth mentioning is that the invitation to join the recruitment process is sent usually within 24 to 48 hours to the candidates. So it's not even that we invite them after 2 weeks when they've already found a job, but this is as close to immediately responding as we can get while verifying documents. So 1/3 doesn't even participate in the recruitment process, and 50% of the candidates who pass the tests do not show up for the interview that they themselves have chosen. So from a recruiter's perspective, and we've asked other recruiters, executive search consultants, HR, etc., they usually have a no-show rate of 30 to 50%. So if you're the candidate that actually shows up, this is already half the won battle. So first takeaway, respond to emails, check your spam, and actually simply participate. There are some candidates who are reluctant to do tests, saying, especially if they're experiencing, well, at my height of my career, I've been working for the last 15, 20 years, why would I do a stupid test? Do them. They're more objective than any human will ever be. And they do test for matches in terms of corporate culture, etc., etc. So really don't be afraid of taking tests. Worst case that can happen, you learn something new about yourself. Or you learn a new test that you potentially can disagree with. If you're interested in the company, in the opportunity, please prepare. And here what I can actually say, prepare. You will soon see, I hope, why we insist so much on the prepare part. The majority of candidates do not prepare for interviews. I have a question in the chat. Does this really apply now that it is an employer's market? I find it hard to believe that people will not show up. To answer your question, we are currently recruiting, for example, at Career Angels, and approximately half of our candidates ghost us. They simply stop responding. And we are fast in inviting them to join the recruitment process. So it might have improved a little bit looking at the employers' markets, but there is still a lot of misbehavior from the candidate side. 90% of candidates are not really prepared. To give you a couple of examples, what preparation means, they didn't read the website. One of the candidates told me that they wanted to join Career Angels because they've always wanted to work for an advertising agency. Okay. They didn't read the job ads. Didn't read about the interviewer. They didn't read about the industry, especially if they want to switch industries. Didn't read the briefing, etc. Here are some comments now happening. Let me read them out. It is true, I will not show up for the next stage of interview for a job I interviewed for yesterday. The conditions are not very good. Then cancel the interview. It might be that with the same company, there will be better conditions or different conditions. And because of ghosting them or simply not showing up, you will end up on a candidate blacklist and barred from all future opportunities with that particular company. Then there's one more comment. Surely ghosting is even worse these days now that people are Yeah. Yeah. Good. Then what does not being not really prepared means? Didn't read the briefing. And now again, preparation means at least reading it, not knowing it. So this is really the bare minimum, which takes half an hour if you're quick. Doesn't mean that you need to be completely, you need to know everything about it, but at least read about the company, the interview, the industry. Why don't candidates prepare? Could be lack of time, lack of motivation, the approach or the attitude, I will wing it, I'll make it work, which usually is that they say, I'll rely on my charisma or experience. Or they rely on having conducted interviews themselves, but recruiting somebody requires a completely different set of skills than being recruited. So interviewing somebody is not the same as being interviewed. So here, proper preparation means read everything you can get a hold on, research the internet and your network, know the most important relevant bits by heart, and ideally be a good conversation partner, have something meaningful or value to say or contribute. It's not always possible, especially not at the first stage, but later stage interviews, absolutely yes. And here again, if you have a job ad, then find examples to all duties and requirements. Job ads, interviews for job ads are very predictable because at the end of the day, they need to see who is the candidate who has done all the things or almost all the things that we're asking for. If for some reason you don't fulfill some, then find alternative arguments. And those arguments, you can find them in both your personal and professional areas. For example, volunteering formally or informally, international travels, shows cultural awareness, side projects, sorry, small consultancy activity, blogging, social media activity, etc. Have answers for all standard questions. There are literally almost no surprises. Even Google has retracted from their initial strategy to ask creative, non-standard questions because they realize that the answers do not predict performance. So there is a set of standard interview questions, and they are known, they're not secret. And if you don't know how to respond to certain questions, Google it. There are hundreds of guides on how to answer a question about your strengths and weaknesses and how to answer a question about something else. So really prepare. And if there is a requirement that you don't fulfill, you can then also challenge that or try to figure out why do they expect candidates from an international consulting firm. And I'll show you in a bit how to then answer those questions, especially when you're a non-standard candidate or a candidate that doesn't fulfill all the requirements. So here, for example, the motivation could be that with an international consulting firm, there's a higher likelihood for the person to speak English fluently, that the quality of work is better, that they are more familiar with processes and different methodologies. So here, what we want to do is talk to the skeptic before he speaks to you, and I'll tell you later what that means. So let's first look at the differences between online and offline. For those present right now, what would you say? Looking at the last couple of months, if you've been in recruitment processes and interviews, what are the main differences? How are online interviews different from offline interviews? What have been your observations and experiences? Okay, a couple of you are typing, so let's see. I'm interested. Limited body language, yes. One person wrote, you cannot establish rapport during online interviews. Online is bad. They feel misjudged. Four more participants are typing. Let's see. What the interviewer sees depends on your lighting conditions and camera at your laptop. That is one of the impressions, yes. Online is more difficult to establish a relationship, empathy with the interviewer. There is the risk to have a cold interview. Here's one comment from Facebook. Empathy is greater online. The fact of not watching your camera makes them believe literally that you are not watching them. A bit more aggressive from the interviewer, especially if they're experienced personally. So you can see you have experienced the differences, and I have to say online interviews are much more difficult than offline interviews. So let's look at the differences. You don't have to travel to online interviews. Clothes, yes, but as one of my colleagues phrases it, the 30% until the Skype line, that's where you need to dress properly. There's no handshake, so this is part of building the rapport. There's no senses, there's no smell. There is not really the initial, what would you like to drink? How did you find the office? That small talk doesn't really exist. But we do have a first question. We do have standard questions, and we do have an ending. Now, because this big part at the beginning isn't there, a lot of candidates think, okay, if that's not there, I just turn on my laptop and go. Now, there's one comment here. I've tried dressing up on online meetings, but not a single interview is dressed up and they feel awkward. They should. Okay, what happens if a candidate has this approach, turn on and go? Candidates are very often late to online interviews because they can't log into a system. They need to install something last minute. The software needs updates. They can't find their headphones. They need to plug in the laptop to charge or the phone. They are often not using their own laptop, so they don't really know how it works, and then they often then ask for the presence of their children or partners to come and help them. They can't find the user on Skype. The microphone doesn't work. The video doesn't work. They have a bad internet connection. The candidate is not really seen well or heard well because there are no headphones, and then there is an echo. So what is the solution? And of what I've shared with you the last two slides, some of you know that Career Angels has been working online since 2013. And we see those when we talk to candidates on the job market in our first career consultations. Those things happen every single day. Although we do send them a preparation guide to say, make sure you have these things and test it, etc., people ignore it. So what is the solution? Create appropriate conditions, test everything you can, and please do not use your company resources. As a lot of employees have moved to home office with company laptops and company programs, they then use those resources to interview. and they then say, listen, I cannot install, I know that you want to speak with me on Skype, but I'm not allowed to install Skype on my company's resources. So I will send you from my company account an invitation so you can interview me. You see how this already sounds wrong, right? So preparing appropriate conditions. Question to all of you, which of these conditions are the best? What number? Thank you. Yes, it's 7. It is 7, but the majority of candidates look everything like but 7. And as you can see, when we took those photos a month ago, and you can see I have not yet been to the hairdresser in the meantime. So what happens, and some of you have pointed out 6 and 10, which is relatively similar, but the light comes from a different angle. So the ideal conditions here are 7. So how do you get to a 7? Let me show you how not to do it. Sitting in front of the window. Those are my favorites. Happens very often when I talk to candidates. Yeah, please don't do that. We don't see you. So then it's even harder to create rapport, because as an interviewer, you don't want to spend the first 5 minutes to ask the person to move to a different place. It's sometimes awkward, etc., etc. So sitting in front of the window, no. Normal height. So when I talk down, no. Plus, it's the wrong lighting. Here I put the laptop on one box, it's a little bit better. Here I put the laptop on 2 boxes. If you're wondering, my laptop is now also on 2 boxes, so I have 2. For me, the ideal height is 2 toolboxes. For some, it might be 3 or 4 books or something. But again, the light is wrong. The light comes from the side window. Here it's the same, but a different angle, different sides. Here it would be kind of good, but I have distracting background, open door, open cupboard. So ideally you face toward the light and make sure the height is good. Then there are a lot of candidates who, for example, sit in an armchair, sit on a couch. I've had that a couple of times where somebody kind of speaks down to me because sitting on the couch, they put the laptop or whatever they're using on the couch table, so that's a no. Holding the phone at the bottom, those are my favorite. When I can see the person barely can hold and it's all, please don't do that. Phone camera upside down, phone selfie style, landscape modes, no, please don't, just no. So this is the ideal, the way I'm sitting now. I'm sitting in front of a window. There's a curtain that makes sure that the light is also equally distributed. Now, what you can also do, you can blur your background. When you have Zoom or Skype, it's not possible with all the equipment. A blur background would look like this. If you have Zoom, you can then actually change your backgrounds. Now, what's important, and I had this in a panel discussion the other day, one of the panelists was very, well, there was a lot of movement and gestures and body language. What the person forgot that when you do that, the background option, the blurred background option, or the background in the background can't react it very quickly. So half the time that panelist looked like half the body was missing, which looked funny. That's how I'll leave it. So here you can, change background option. There's a website, zoomvirtualbackgrounds.com/browse. So best conditions, summarizing, make sure that the background is not distracting, camera placed at eye level so the person actually feels that you're talking to them. For me, this is about 2 toolboxes. Face toward the lights. From a technical point of view, 1 hour before the interview, log in, click, check if everything works. Usually there is a test video and audio settings. Please use headphones. Headphones increase the quality of the conversation by approximately 30%, and that is a lot. If you can choose, first, laptop is the best option when it comes to stability, then tablet, then phone. Make sure that you also prepare the plan B in case something doesn't work, and make sure you have a stable internet connection. Here is an example of my adapter that I use especially now for webinars or important calls to make sure that the connection is stable. With Skype, do the Skype test call. Important, which most forget, the display name is not the same as the username, is not the same as the email address that you have registered with. So here, for example, Mini Angel Marcelina is the display name, but the actual username is live:/Marcelina.Woroniak. This is the person behind webinar@careerangels.eu. Here, the display name is Mini Angel Mira, but the username is live:/cid.fch8309, etc., etc. Especially for users who have been using Skype for a long time, your email address can be associated with 2 or 3 different Skype accounts. How do you find that? You click on Skype, and then you have the Skype name and the actual email address, and you always share the actual Skype name, and make sure you share the Skype name. So instead of turn on and go, make sure you prepare everything. And now some will ask me, because I did spend about 10 minutes on this, is it really that important? Does it really merit those 20 slides out of a webinar on online interviews? Yes, it does. Imagine that you are a recruiter who conducts 10 interviews per day, and 80% of the interviewed people present themselves in a bad way. So who will you remember? You will not focus on the content. You will remember the good ones. I mean, you will remember, oh, that's the lady with the underwear in the background, or that's the gentleman with the dirty dishes in the kitchen. It's not about the kitchen. We all know that not everybody has an office for every working family member or studying family member. And it is absolutely okay to interview sitting in the kitchen, but it's the background what they will remember. So I already said that they will associate you with the one with the dirty plates, the one with the messy room, the one who couldn't figure out how to turn around the Skype photo. Or here another one. What would you think of a candidate who is 50 plus who can't figure out how the camera works? But they do tell you, they assure you that they're up to date with technology. What would you think about a candidate who underlines multiple times that they focus on quality, that they are a good manager, that they're detail-oriented, and you see a mess in the background? So, of course, you don't have all these things in offline. In offline, you pay attention to the quality of the shoes, or if the fingernails are manicured more. But online, there are other things that we need to pay attention to, and those things can influence whether you continue into the next stages or not. Okay, and from now on, online is equal to offline, and I have to say, well, almost. We'll get there. So when we're now at the during stage of the interview, and here's an example that actually happened. So we'll have a couple of cases here today as well. This is something that actually happened. A candidate asked me to call them. So I did. Hi, this is Sandra calling from Career Angels. I saw that you applied to a career consultant role. Could I ask you a couple of questions? PCC means potential career consultant. Sure, but I can distinctly hear background noise. Probably shopping somewhere. Well, great. What is your current situation? I'm looking for a job. What kind? Well, something in HR. Why are you interested in Career Angels? There are similar companies out there. I found the job ad interesting. Which part? Oh, I don't remember. Okay, are you currently employed? What's your situation? I'm not with that company anymore, so I'm actively looking. But the CV that we received earlier said they were still employed. And this is a so-called screening call that actually happened and was about a year ago. This is somebody who is actively looking for a job and asked me to call them at this specific time. Now, how could this call have gone completely differently? And here are already hidden tips for all of you. This is Sandra calling from Career Angels. I saw that you applied to a career consultant role. Could I ask you a couple of questions? Hi, could you please be so kind to repeat who is calling, what company? Sandra Bichl from Career Angels. Would now be a good moment? Could we please speak in 30 minutes? I need to find a quiet spot to be able to concentrate on the conversation. So again, this person might be still shopping, but will find a spot to talk to me. Plus, they have asked my full name and the company details, so they can go back and review what have I been emailing with them. Is this a new contact, somebody I've emailed with, etc. Sure, let me call you back in half an hour. So half an hour later, this potential career consultant prepares in the meantime. And then I call again. This is Sandra calling from Career Angels. Could I now ask you a couple of questions? Sure. Great. What's your current situation? I've been in HR for 15 years, out of which 7 in recruitment. I have enjoyed being with a recruitment company and now on the client side, but what I enjoy the most is actually helping my candidates and sometimes friends and family in their career management and job search. And although I'm happy where I am, when I saw your job ad on LinkedIn, I knew I had to apply. Why are you interested in Career Angels? There are similar companies out there. To be honest, it was the first ad I saw and I haven't yet had the chance to prepare a good answer for that. Your phone call took me by surprise. Please ask me next time. I'll make sure to research accordingly. What about helping others in career management and job search do you enjoy? And then the conversation goes into a completely different direction. Here's a question from in the chat. Once I said to an HR to call me back the next day as I was in a meeting that day, and he never called me back. That happens rarely. It can happen, but it happens rarely. Now, if you had the number of the person who called you, if you had their company name, email address, you could have actually emailed them and not lost that contact. Researchers do approximately 10, 20, 30 screening calls per day. Yes, they can miss somebody when they ask for a call back, but if you see the quality of those 2 conversations, of course, a researcher or an executive search consultant, a headhunter, an HR person prefers to speak to somebody who actually can focus on the conversation and give high quality answers. So once in a while, yes, miss it, but in order not to miss or not to miss out on a repeat call, ask definitely for the contact details, who called, what time, when will they call back, set the time, make sure they confirm by email, etc. So a couple of things to do to avoid a situation where you're not called back. Okay, so when it comes to interviewing, there are 4 levels of interviewing. One I very lightly called basic bad interviewing. Then we have basic good interviewing, strategic interviewing, and CWARB, which is strategic interviewing with active relationship building element. In other words, building rapport. And the more there is an employer's market, the higher up I need to be when it comes to the interviewing skills. So let's start with basic bad interviewing. Basic bad interviewing is thinking or behaving as if you were at a police station and under interrogation. I also call that ping pong style interviews, where you are asked a question, you give the answer, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Well, you know. So this is basic bad interviewing. Basic good interviewing starts with the first question, and there is a predictable beginning. All the interviews start the same way, and it is either why have you applied, why have you contacted me, what is your current situation, or please introduce yourself. And this question is always answered the same way. The only thing that changes is the first sentence and the last sentence of your reply. So what do? You introduce yourself. Well, I have applied because, or I have contacted you because I have 15 years of experience as in HR, blah, 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 and the slide we just saw before. Please introduce yourself. I have more than 15 years of experience, blah, blah, blah. What is your current situation? I have more than 15 years of experience, and you have your auto presentation. Where does that come from? From your CV. This is the unique selling proposition. This is your profile summary. So going back to module 1 and the first step is super important, because the better you prepare your CV, the better will be your auto presentation at the beginning of an interview. And your auto presentation will set the tone for the rest of the interview. Practice it so it sounds smooth and natural and authentic, and it's really you. And don't ask, well, shall I introduce myself professionally or personally? You are at a professional context interview, so it's only professional. And please do not start with, oh, I'm currently looking for a job. We know that. That's why you're probably applied actively. Okay, here an example of the different levels of interviewing. Example, finance director, recruiter to candidate. Why should we hire you? Here the first answer, because you can rely on me. I'm a good manager and a loyal employee. This would be basic bad interviewing, and this is, I'll show you an example later. Candidate, because I have more than 10 years of experience in finance, I am a good manager. I have experience in working in international corporations. This would be better interviewing. Answer number 3, because in the last 3 years, I was a co-author of 2 restructuring projects, which I have also delivered. On every position I have held in the last 7 years, I was able to identify savings of €500,000. I have also managed to reduce unwanted turnover in my unit from 23 to 0% in 6 months since assuming the position. And this is strategic interviewing. Now, of course, we'll do that in a bit. So other standard predictable questions are, what can you tell me about yourself? What is your current situation? Why did you send me your CV? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Of all your previous jobs, which did you enjoy the most and why? And then, how do you manage conflicts? Describe an event that demonstrates your initiative, proactivity, something. What style of management gets the best from you? What kind of manager, salesperson, receptionist, finance guy, program, etc. are you? What have been your major achievements to date, etc.? You know that these questions might come, so why not prepare for them? Why are you a good candidate? Why should we hire you? Now, we will discuss during the Q&A the most difficult questions for you. So you now have an hour to formulate, not now, but you can prepare the 2 most difficult interview questions for you. I'll choose the ones that repeat themselves most often or are particularly tricky or non-obvious and generate the most mistakes. And we'll do that during the Q&A. And if it's something specific, make sure you give context. So for example, if you are, Could you tell me why you didn't work for half a year 2 years ago? And if that was your question, for example, to discuss your Q&A, I need to know what happened in that half year, so I can actually comment on that properly. So during the Q&A session, think about in the next hour, what are the two most difficult interview questions that you want me to discuss during the Q&A time? Good. Then another very standard question is how much, meaning what are your salary expectations? How much are you currently making? We would need a whole other webinar to talk about salary negotiations and answering that question. I have prepared a very detailed blog post summarizing over 30 articles on salary negotiations, plus our own know-how and tips and tricks and everything. Marcelina will send a link to that blog post after today's webinar, so you can read it and apply it. Okay, so overall, when you are in an interview situation, assume that the person has not read your CV or they don't remember it. Very often the person, when deciding that they want to interview you, they glance at your CV, usually at the first page or first half page, and say, I want to talk to that person. And then the interview happens 1 or 2 weeks later, and in between they've seen another 100 CVs. So they might not remember, or before the interview, they might have only 5 minutes to actually read your CV, or they will read your CV while talking to you. So when answering interview questions, assume that the person is not familiar with your CV. Assume that there will be no additional follow-up or detailing questions. So anything that is important for the interviewer to know from your perspective, you need to say it. You need to be very explicit in that. Don't expect follow-up questions. Or if you don't tell them, they won't know. Give full answers in accordance with STAR. What does STAR stand for? Situation, come on, task, action, and results. To give you, here is an obvious STAR example. Question from the interviewer: how did you manage to finish project XYZ on time and budget? Well, I made sure I had all the resources and communicated with the team accordingly. This is a standard answer, but now let's improve that. How did you manage to finish this project on time and budget? At the time, I had been a project manager for only 3 months, and I took over the project that was already 4 months delayed, and the client was not happy about it, to say the least. I was tasked to make sure the project was delivered, ideally making up for lost time. The budget wasn't even a priority. I then proceeded to swiftly interview everyone involved to understand the situation and then identify the problem, and so on. So they audited the resources at hand, communicate closely with the client. At the end, not only did we make up for lost time, I also found a cheap IT solution that helped us stay within budget. The client was so impressed by how I turned around the project that we got another assignment from them. So what did the person do? Instead of going into ping pong style and say, well, I communicated and that's how I handled the project, you give context: situation, challenge, problem, context. Then you describe the task, then the actions you took, and important, then you share the results. The most common mistakes when using the STAR format is candidates don't take enough time to embed the task, action, result in the appropriate context. And this is especially important when context brings out the importance of skills or results. It is a difference if you've just taken over a project that was already delayed and you saved it versus business as usual. Candidates focus only on task and actions, not mentioning the results, or they only mention the results, without explaining how they and their teams got there. Here is, I do see the question from Facebook, and in 5 years, why are you looking? Why are you looking? No, okay. I see those questions. I'll respond to them during Q&A. So a non-obvious situation, how to use star, is, for example, here, why did you change from company A to company B? An answer could be, well, ping pong style, I got a call from a headhunter. This is a true story. So this was one of my clients. And here also for you some background information, company and company B. So company B was located in a different country where the candidate had no previous experience in. So the change from A to B was something special. So there is some context missing. Okay, a headhunter called you, but it's very non-standard for a headhunter to source that particular profile in a completely different country. So the actual answer from that candidate that we worked out. Well, one thing you need to know is that country B has long been a favorite travel destination of mine. I've been going fishing there for more than 10 years, every summer, and I had taken my family there. Now imagine summer 2003, I'm sitting in the boat on this beautiful lake in B with my fishing buddy, and all of the sudden the phone rings. An executive search consultant I had known for years called to ask if I was interested in moving to B for a job he had seen on their internal job board for clients. And of course I said yes. I went through the entire interviewing process, and because I had been with company A at that position for already 5 years and I had just delivered that, it made sense. Plus, although I was based in B, I was still responsible for my previous region. And this is the alternative answer to a headhunter called me. Another example of how to use star in non-obvious situations. For example, how do you deal with conflict? I actively readjust my attitude during a conflict situation. This means that I strive to listen to the other person's point of view without becoming defensive. I also attempt to move the confrontation to a private space to avoid further complications. That could be an answer. Hold on, okay. But what I want to get there is to then say, let me give you an example. And that example is then in the star format. I know that you are posting already your questions that are difficult for you. We will have a couple of interactions in the meantime, so please post those questions in the Q&A. I will answer all of them. Okay, good. Here are some tips, especially when using star in non-obvious situations. Don't blabber, especially online. Blabbering is not storytelling. So some just start talking and talking, not realizing, not reading the room, not reading the interviewer. And one question was asked, and 20 minutes later, we still haven't heard the answer. Sneak in important aspects of your professional experience and competencies. As you saw in the previous example with a headhunter called me, that person did mention, and because I had been with the company for 5 years and I had just delivered this and that, that's why. So you can sneak in those bits into the conversation. Prepare concrete examples for all generic HR questions. And here, an extension of how offline is not really online. So what happens there? Why isn't it fully the same? When candidates sit in their own comfort zone, candidates often get too comfy. They don't control their own body language. I don't want to even tell you how often I've had candidates or potential clients sitting in front of the screen, moving around, fidgeting. The other day I talked to a CEO who actually put their foot on the desk and then embraced his knee. Some lie on the couch completely subconsciously. They pay less attention to the interviewer's body language. And yes, you have already picked up on that. The body languages are much more subtle. It is, do they take notes? Are they interested? Because you just see this here. So it requires much more concentration. They listen less attentively. Hence, what recruiters have observed in the last 2-3 months, candidates talk more, but not necessarily to the point. Moving on to strategic interviewing. So, when we look at strategic interviewing, before you go into any interview situation, ask yourself, what is the goal of this interview? I did ask you that before. Presenting yourself broadly is the goal when you talk to a headhunter for the first time who says that they don't have currently any recruitment processes. The goal of the interview could be to get into the next round. So from headhunter to HR to the top, meaning to the business side, to the decision maker. The goal of the interview could be to demonstrate your added value to get hired. So this is when you talk to the business side. So it is tricky because you need to remember the goal of the interview, which every time will be different in the context of the company you're interviewing for, the industry that you're at, the market situation, the interviewer itself. So being a candidate, I want to say being a candidate, I can't say that, it's being recorded. Being a candidate is something very challenging, if I using politically correct words. Because not only do you have to present yourself, you need to think about what is the goal of the interview in context of the company, the industry, the market situation, the interviewer. So it is very difficult. And you also need to remember, how did I get this interview? Is it through a headhunter? Did I get it directly? Was I recommended? Is there a networking? Is it a job ad? Because then your answers can be slightly different. So before an interview, my recommendation is to ask yourself, what are the 5 most important things the interviewer should know about me within the first 20 minutes? Sometimes the interview will not last longer than 20 minutes. And you make a list. I said 5 most important things. Usually it's 3 to 5 most important things. And 20 minutes, because very often, especially if it's a get-to-know interviews, a mixture between a screening call and an actual interview, if they don't hear something relevant within the first 20 minutes, they will not extend the interview. So here, an example would be, let me just pull out all 5. So let's say that for that particular candidate, what they want to make sure that is communicated within the first 2 minutes is experience in digitalization, complex projects, multicultural teams, MBA with digital, and they speak 3 languages. So how does that then work? How do you use that in practice? Let's assume that we're now in the middle of the interview. It's a 5th question, and the interviewer asks you, so why did you move from company A to B? So you would give the star answer and mention something that is important from the 5 points. So instead of only focusing on being technically correct in giving the answer, I also want to strategically add more points. So here I'd say I would give a star answer, and then I would get the opportunity to do a full digitalization project, not only for one department, but the entire organization. for example. What are your strengths? And then, depending on what has not been mentioned before, that's, I already mentioned just now, digitalization. So the person goes back mentally and says, okay, have I mentioned that I speak 3 languages fluently? No. So my strength, one of my strengths is that I speak 3 languages fluently. Thanks to that, I'm a better manager for my multicultural team, where I've been able to keep the attrition rate under 3%. And my second strength is this, and my third strength is that. So you answer those questions strategically. So that was actually, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Here, the answer will be different depending on how the first part of the interview has been going so far. If the 6th question wasn't what are your strengths, but what would your current boss say about you? Then you say, well, my current boss would highlight that I speak 3 languages fluently, and that's why I'm a better multicultural manager, etc., etc. So you can sneak in different points strategically from the 3 to 5 top list of things that you want to communicate. So whatever hasn't been mentioned yet. Now, I mentioned something at the beginning, the talk to the skeptic before he speaks to you. How does that work, and what is that? That means that you as a candidate proactively address obvious weaknesses or missing competencies up front. And here a couple of examples in a bit. It shows awareness and it shows maturity. So again, these are real examples. I had a client who was an ultra competent CFO who looked like 21. So what we figured out here, when introducing herself, she said, nice meeting you. And yes, I'm actually a CFO, although I look like a first-year student. I have been in my role for the last 7 years, and I managed $2 billion in equity. With a statement like this, with addressing something up front, the interviewer will not be sitting in a conference room or in front of the screen, double checking the photo or the CV and the candidate, trying to figure out, am I actually talking to the right person? So you want the attention of the interviewer on the things that matter and not the things that might be distracting. So what we, one of the other strategies with that particular client wasn't only the verbal introduction. We also redid how she introduced herself more formally, not a shortened nickname version. Plus, she dressed and used a different makeup to at least not look like 21, but 26. This is a recent case, competent managers with rusty English. What did we do here? Yes, thank you for inviting me to the interview. I have to say I am a bit nervous. I used to work in English for every day for 10 years. And now, even after this short break, preparing for this interview, I realized how rusty my English has become. Now, important, he mentions, I immediately signed up for conversation classes, meaning I'm already working on that week on what you might think could be a weakness. Because otherwise, if I don't address that upfront, the interviewer will be sitting here, and after 5 minutes will say, no, but this English is not good. I'll move on with candidates with a better English. But if I already know, the candidate used to work in English fluently, is now rusty, and is already working on it, it's a non-issue for me anymore. Another example, here, case requirement of having worked in an international law firm or international consulting firm or international agency. As I said, what I want to do here is understand why, if you don't have it, ask yourself, why could that be so important, especially that if you have all the other competencies. So if they have decided to invite you to an interview, I mean, that's already half the battle. But now it's important to understand why that particular aspect could be important for the potential employer. So as already mentioned, it could be use of language, corporate standards, knowing a reporting system, quality, processes, etc. So how do you then rephrase it, or how do you talk to the skeptic before they address it? I know I don't have experience in an international law firm, in an international consulting firm, or an international agency, but I've been working in English or German for 3 years. The majority of my clients, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and I don't know, Volvo, were international corporations with very demanding reporting rules, as well as strict quality and compliance standards. So I'm giving alternative arguments Here, that happens more and more often. Experienced project manager with no project management certificate, have been invited to an interview, could address it up front. I saw that the prerequisite are Scrum and Agile certificates, which I don't have, and I have to say, not yet. Although I have been using both methodologies and practices in my own teams for the last 3 years, I understand that the confirmation of my theoretical knowledge is important. I already have signed up for the necessary exams. And you take out this potential no-go from a recruiter's perspective. Okay, 4th level, C-Warbe. So strategic interviewing with active relationship building element. So we now went from basic bad interviewing, so ping pong style, to basic good interviewing using STAR, to strategic interviewing, where you make sure that you mention the most important things to know about you within the first 20 minutes. And here we said having a good CV, good profile summary prepared is crucial. And now the last step, which is the absolute most difficult one, especially online, is with active relationship building elements. I hear all of you interviewing online and building rapport is difficult, but it is possible. So how do you do that? So it is the same as the strategic interviewing, plus what do we add here? You fully engage with the interviewer, you actively listen, you enrich the other sides, you share your energy, you build a connection, you build rapport. How to do that? Among others, tuning into the communication style. So let's look at the different communication styles. On the X, on the lower axis, we have low and high assertiveness, and on the Y, we have low responsiveness and high responsiveness. What does that mean? Low and high, let's start with responsiveness. Low and high responsiveness is more or less the amount of words I use and the amount of emotions I use when answering a question. To give you an example, Monday morning, or let's say after quarantine time, everybody or 50% is back in the office, and you ask somebody, so how was your home office? And they say, yeah, it was good. You ask somebody else, yeah, no, we figured it out. We came up with a system where my husband and I, my wife and I did something, and 2 sentences. And then you ask somebody else and they say, oh no, our home office in quarantine time, oh, let me tell you. So I had to figure out how to get my 2 kids and and 10 minutes later, you still don't know how to figure out home office for themselves. So low to high responsiveness is how much response, how many words, how much emotion are in the answers, how long are the answers, how long are the reactions. So this is low and high responsiveness. And low and high assertiveness is looking at the traditional assertiveness definition. How much the own opinion is pushed, or how much I stick to certain limits. Okay, so now let's look at low assertiveness and low responsiveness. We call that communication style analytical. And low assertiveness and high responsiveness, we call that communication style amiable. It should say amiable. And high assertiveness and low responsiveness is driver, and high responsiveness and high assertiveness, the communication style, is called expressive. So amiable, how do amiable people come across during interviews? Patient, sympathetic, mature, stable, considerate, team person, supportive, loyal, etc. Expressive come across as verbal, enthusiastic, impulsive, motivating, convincing, influential, confident, optimistic, charming, sometimes even dramatic. Analytical communication style, they're precise, they talk slower, they're disciplined, deliberate, I can't do that, cautious, diplomatic, systematic, logical, conventional. And when it comes to the driver, action and result-oriented, decisive, they're problem solvers, direct, demanding, assertive, competitive, independent. Now, you can hear the communication style of your interviewer usually within the first 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Is how to formulate questions, how to formulate follow-up questions, are they high energy, low energy, etc. And you can engage with that. So you look at speed of speaking, way of behaving. Do they actually small talk? Do they wait for you to initiate? Do they ask a lot of questions? Do they create a friendly or challenging or accepting atmosphere? And here a tip, you can try to look at their LinkedIn profile and see, do they share information? How do they share it? How much activity is there? Expressive styles, there's more cheering and sharing. If it's more on the analytical side, you will see no activity or very data-driven, for example, communication. So tuning into the interviewer's style. So if somebody has an analytical interviewing style and you are on the expressive communication style, or driver and amiable, so those are the direct opposites that work like oil on fire, it doesn't work well together. So if you know, if you identify the right communication style, you're able to tune in with that and then maybe focus more on facts, or focus more on emotions, or focus more on energy, or focus more on results. Yeah, do they ask about details? So if there are follow-up questions on details, you know, it's a high likelihood that the person is more on the analytical side. Okay, I see that a couple of you were typing. I think you have questions or want to comment. If you do, please, yes, there is something coming up. Or not. Okay, so here are a couple of additional tips when interviewing with the specific players, headhunters, with the business side, and even with artificial intelligence. So when interviewing with headhunters, what's important to know is that no headhunter is bored. There's always a reason for an introduction meeting. Even if they say, I don't have projects currently, there's a high likelihood that they are currently working on something, or they don't want to share it with you because of confidentiality. And depending on how you present yourself during the first 20 minutes, you will find about their reasons or you won't. What's here now important, especially for executives. So if you are in a decision-making role, obviously you can be in a situation that you are invited to interviews just because they want to develop a relationship with you. They see in you a potential client and not a potential candidate. It is annoying, but use it to your advantage. And when talking to headhunters, make sure that no conversation with the recruiter is one-sided and that you always walk away with something beneficial. What could that be? You can ask for feedback on your profile. You have given the recruiter 20, 30 minutes of your time. Now it's time for them to share value with you as well. So you can ask them, well, how do you see my profile in context of today's market? What do you think about my salary expectations? How do you see the current market? What companies do you think are currently recruiting? What companies do you think could be interested in my profile? So use them as sources of information. You can ask about their other open recruitment processes and offer to recommend somebody from your network to them. Okay. I did say use them as a source of information, but I'd also have to don't believe everything you hear. What do I mean by that? This is only one opinion. One opinion does not stand, or one experience does not stand for the rest of the market. One example, I had a client, CEO, who sent out her CV, and a headhunter called that CEO, reprimanding them on the document because it looked differently. That CEO then called me and said, Sandra, we need to stop emailing all those companies because this headhunter just called me to tell me that the CV is crap, da 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 da. I did convince the client to not change anything in the format, and that person was then in 15 recruitment processes within 6 weeks. So again, it's just one impression. Then we had a client in the finance industry. She had 10 interviews with executive search consultants in the same city, operating in the same finance markets. And she said 1/3 told her, listen, you have a good profile, it's a good time to move. 1/3 of the interviews, they actually told her, be happy to have a job. And the other third was completely neutral, random conversations. Now imagine that you do not play the numbers, you don't contact 50 headhunters, but only 10. And out of those 10, you interview with 2 who tell you that you should be happy that you have a job. You don't get to experience the whole market. So be careful with taking feedback too literal, too black and white. Just use it as one more data point in your statistics. And if really more than 1/3 says something and they keep repeating a certain piece of advice, then maybe it's time to listen, but don't just believe one person. Okay. And here's some tips when interviewing with HR. So with HR, you have standard okay, maybe that's a good point, because this was with headhunters. Do you have any questions when it comes to interviewing with headhunters? About not interview questions and headhunters, but generally headhunters. Okay, here's a question. But this is not recruiting related. This will be in the Q&A that I'll remember in a bit. Okay, good. Then let's move on. I do see your question with the metaphor. So when interviewing with HR, again, you have standard predictable questions. There are literally no surprises. And they're gatekeepers. They need to make sure that you as a candidate don't waste a manager's time. That's it. It's important for them to understand the candidate's motivation. Motivation in terms of overall career. So why did you move from A to B? Was it a choice that you made? Was it a plan? Why? What motivated you? They want to verify the culture fit. And with competency-based, and they like and practice competency-based interviews, meaning they will ask a lot of questions. Give me examples of how you work in a team, of your leadership, how you solve a problem, how you made an important decision, how you communicated something difficult, how you did this, how you did that. Competency-based interviews. So if you know that this is going to happen, prepare for that. Their role is also to verify the truthfulness of the CV, because everybody lies, as Dr. House would say, or express the same thing differently. So for some, candidates, when they see international experience, it could mean for some, worked and lived in 9 countries, worked at an international company, or worked at a local company with international clients. And all these things could qualify as international experience. So this is about the truthfulness. This is to understand, how do they understand international? How do they understand restructuring? How do they understand digitalization, etc.? Okay. When interviewing with the business side, and there are a lot of mistakes, especially if you talk to the business side when you yourself contacted them through direct application. You need to make sure to communicate your potential added value. You need to make sure to know and communicate your unique selling proposition. They need to understand what problems you can solve for the business. And especially if you were the one proactively getting in touch with them, you need to understand, where do you fit in the organization? You need to have ideas and do the proper research up front. So this is almost like solution selling. If you're an outside consultant, to say, listen, I think I could fit in here, I could fix this, I could do that, etc. And as I already mentioned, it is a source of a lot of mistakes and a lot of lost opportunities, because you were the one getting in touch. So you should be the one saying, listen, I can do these various things, or manage the conversation differently, where somebody says, okay, well, please tell me about yourself, da, 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 da. And then you, as the outside person, you are a potential, let's say, consultant who says, okay, so how are your sales numbers doing currently, and what channels have you been using? So you can also proactively, in the organization with the business side, you can, in the conversation, identify potential areas where you could add value. Okay. And tips on pre-recorded interviews. So that's another example of technology being used. How does that work? Pre-recorded interviews, you log onto a platform. There are 10 questions pre-recorded, and you then record your answers. And there are 2 types of pre-recorded interviews. One where you get only one opportunity to record your answer, and the other one where you can record your answers as often as you want. And statistics show that the second option, candidates do better if they can adapt and adjust their answers and re-record them. What happens to the recording? Well, it depends on how the system is set up. A human listens to the recording and then assesses it and shares it maybe with the hiring manager. Or first, artificial intelligence assesses your answers and then recommends the candidate to a human for further processing. And one of the examples, one of the providers of pre-recorded interviews is HireView. And here in one of the interviews, they said we get about 25,000 data points from 15 minutes of video per candidate. So they interpret how truthful is that person when answering. Do they lie? Is there active deceit? Are they happy about something? Happy, get excited about certain questions, or not that excited, etc. And if there are providers and new challenges, there's usually also new solutions. One gentleman decided to prepare an interview trainer based on AI. Interview trainer is an AI app that asks interview questions and provides feedback on how you may be perceived by your interviewer. From soft to hard skills, we've got it covered. Hashtag Ace Your Interview. Is available right now only for Apple users, meaning iPhone. So it is an app, no web version here, and doesn't work yet for Android. Okay, further recommendations, and we're good in time. When looking at interviews and preparing for interviews, you can also look at it from a different perspective. So make sure to have arguments and reasons ready for why should you be on the long list, why should you even participate in the recruitment process, why should you be taken into consideration. So this is, we've had it in one of the previous modules, why do you qualify overall as a candidate to be taken into consideration? And then challenge yourself further and say, why are you shortlist material? Why are you better than 500 other candidates? What is that unique thing about you? And make sure you have answers and reasons for both questions. And here, what's important to know, if you don't know the answers, that your interviewer won't know either. So you need to prepare that. Okay, next one. Now, something I should have started with maybe at the very beginning, but that's a question to you. How would you define what is an interview? Seems random, and I know we've been talking about interviews for an hour and a half now, and I know it might be a bit late, but this is a question to all of you. What is an interview? How would you define that, or give examples? Okay, real life filter. No other. Okay, one person is typing. Some of you are typing. A way to find if you will fit the job needs. Okay, I'll help you out. I know this was a little bit of a trick question. For those who believe that only meetings that are called interviews are real interviews. This is something to remember. A screening call from a headhunter is an interview. A conversation with a stranger during a mixer is an interview. A presentation in front of the board is an interview. Sometimes you're interviewing to keep your job, especially nowadays. A non-obligatory meeting with a recruiter is an interview. A session with your career consultant is an interview. A meeting with your boss is an interview. A quick catch-up coffee, even if it's virtual with an acquaintance, is an interview. A lunch with a former colleague is an interview. A casual talk after an interview is an interview. So every business interaction you have is part of an interview, either to keep a job or to potentially get recommended to one. Because how you do anything is how you do everything. So sometimes we don't even think we're being interviewed, although we are. So all those tips and recommendations apply in all the situations that were just mentioned. And here one more perspective to consider. Again, real story. We organized a meeting for CEOs so they could openly but confidentially discuss how they manage their careers. We asked them, so, well, how do you actually manage your career? Who do you speak to? Who do you confide in, etc.? And after the reunion, one of the CEOs said that they were super happy with the meeting, but would have a suggestion. And she said to me, maybe we could have two groups next time. We should split up this meeting for CEOs who are looking for a job and those who are not looking for a job. To which I then replied, you're always looking for a job, but often you don't know it yet, or at least not how fast it will happen. So we're always constantly interviewing either to keep our jobs or to be recommended to a new one, or actually when in job search mode. And it is a chance, an opportunity to build your personal brand. And again, how you do anything is how you do everything. So my final tips, obviously prepare. Practice difficult questions. For example, difficult questions could include career breaks, sabbaticals, or couldn't find a job. This is something that does happen and where candidates can be challenged. And some recruiters can get a little bit challenging. Okay, so the last half year, couldn't you find a job? Was that a real sabbatical? What's the deal? How have you used your time? How have you used your career break? Why did you leave a certain company? Or this is the Facebook question. Why are you looking for a new job? Can't your current company give you what you are looking for? So this can be tricky, especially how to formulate certain answers to be politically correct, to not give too much information, especially if it's sensitive or confidential information, or simply there was a big personal conflict. So it is sometimes difficult to phrase certain answers. Why did you work only 4 months there? Then I would further looking at the CV writing stage. Do you actually need to include something where you only worked for 4 months? Maybe it doesn't even have to be included in your CV. Then you won't get asked that question. And any other question that you yourself find difficult. So practice. And very final tips, and this can affect you or your recruiter or both of you. There's something called Zoom fatigue, which is basically online meetings are tiring and impact our concentration and interview performance. And for those of you who are familiar with TED, Marcelina will send it also to you, ideas.that.com. Zoom fatigue is real. Here's why: video calls are so draining. And if you have an interview that is at 5 p.m., 4 p.m., especially if somebody has already spoken to another 8 people that day, they will be speaking with you with their Zoom fatigue, or you will be speaking with them with your Zoom fatigue. So there are a couple of tips in there how to manage that, to be seen as a fresh candidate, to wants to give certain answers, etc. Okay, now interview stage after, just to wrap that up. At the end of the interview, at the end of the interviews, for us, almost after the interview, always have 2 to 3 questions, no less, no more. And one of those questions should be, what are the next steps? In other words, who calls whom or emails whom by when? If you don't know that, if you don't have agreed on that, we get these questions a lot. So when should I follow? I've had an interview 3 weeks ago. When should I follow up for feedback? Well, then we ask, as career consultants, what did you agree on with your interview? Oh, nothing. So help yourself and agree on next steps. Who contacts whom, how, what's the channel, and by when. Send a thank you email with a summary of your call within 24 hours. Follow up 3 to 7 days after the agreed deadline. So do give them a little bit of space. And if then there's nothing, follow up after another 14 days. And if then there's nothing, which does happen, and I hear your frustration when recruiters ghost you, get in touch with somebody else from the organization if you had contact with them. Another tip, make a summary of the interview for your own records. Why? Once you have more than 5 interviews, you'll start mixing up companies and confusing people. And I do hope that all of you will have that problem soon. So this is how we recommend our clients keep notes. So you make a note on the interview style, on a scale from 1 to 10, how do you assess yourself, how the interview went, any weird, challenging, interesting questions, key things you discussed, information you obtained, the next steps we agreed on. Then you have a checklist, send a thank you email, send additional documents, send references, connect with that person on one of the social platforms, etc., etc. So also after today, Marcelina will send you this document in a doc version so you can use it for your own personal use. Okay, and before we start with Q&A, for those who have been here before, you know the drill. With those who have not, if you can think of friends, family members, former colleagues, spread the word. Now, spreading the word here now means spread the word not necessarily about open webinars, because today is the last module, but about the YouTube channel, about our company page, and anything we do. You can keep up with what's going on. Career Angels on LinkedIn, we have our blog, we have the article on job search in light of COVID-19. We have a free materials section on our website. You can join the group on LinkedIn or Facebook. Use it when looking, building your network, for example. As I've mentioned, we are crowdfunding our in total 16 webinars. So if you think that this has been helpful, useful, valuable, please do chip in. It doesn't matter if it's 10 euro or 100 euro. Anything helps, especially nowadays. You can, other ways to say thank you, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow, like, our page on Facebook, LinkedIn, as mentioned. You can engage with our content, and you can tell 3 friends to do exactly the same. Okay, good. So now over to you. I did ask you to post your most difficult questions. We do have full 20 minutes to do that. So let's do that. In the meantime, I have one of the questions here. How do you answer a question that was from Facebook? Why are you looking for a job? Which is actually very often a hidden question about what don't you have in today's company. And the way to answer the question is by being honest and saying, listen, I want bigger projects. And if it's things, one important thing from a candidate's perspective to also do is to show that you have demonstrated initiative to fix it. In other words, giving you an example, I have a client now who left his previous employer because he found out that that the previous CEO had some financial irregularities. Now, one way to go about it is, well, why did you leave your current employer? Saying, I found irregularities and I left. There was a line I couldn't cross, which is one way to go about it. But then I get more curious. So what is that line and what happened? So rephrasing that could be, well, I found irregularities. I spent 4 months talking to the board abroad to figure out what's going on. We tried to find a situation that was agreeable for both parties, but we couldn't. That's why I left. So what I want to say with this, don't just communicate, well, this happened, I didn't get a bigger project, but then say within that bigger, I would like, one of the reasons I want to work with bigger projects, I've been trying to get onto them for the last 12 months. I haven't been, I've had a conversation, I was almost in, So show that you've at least tried 2 or 3 times so that there is proactivity. Okay, so that was the first question from Facebook. Hold on, I need to scroll back. Okay. Okay, then the second question was, what are your strengths or weaknesses? Comment here, it is difficult to give honest answers that are original and don't stop the recruiter from taking you into consideration for the next step of the recruitment process. When it comes to strength, I already mentioned how to use the strength question strategically. When it comes to weaknesses, this is a question about how aware are you of your own shortcomings. Easy weaknesses to say, I know I should be working on my English, I should be working on my language skills. It could be something where you can show that you all are already working on it. For example, as a manager, you could say, I know that I have the tendency of being a micromanager. I've been working on that with a coach for the last year, and I've already improved because instead of checking in with my colleagues every day, I do it only once a week, for example. Okay. Good. Then we have a second question from Facebook. Hold on. I do see the metaphor. Facebook Dorota. I had more than a year break at work. This concerned important family and health matters. How to answer the employer, why so long? If the break is recent and you have not been working for the last, let's say, year, add to your CV that was a sabbatical personal and professional development, and make sure, because it's okay for everybody to take a break or not be able to find a job for a couple of months. But the question behind is, what have you done professionally? How have you used the break? So if you're in the situation where your break is longer than 2, 3, 4 months, make sure to include in your CV and in your answers how you have kept up with what's going on the job market or on the market in general. So sign up, use Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning to do courses, to be able to say, well, maybe I have not worked for a year, but I know what kind of technology is now being used in my department. I have familiarized myself with this and that. In the meantime, I have completed a course on digital marketing, etc., and add that to your CV, and then also in the interview situations. This is immensely helpful. Okay. Then the apples question. With your metaphor, I am an apple searching for an orange. For those who don't know what that person is talking about, this was in module 1. In English, you have this phrase, compare apples to oranges or oranges to apples. For example, a recruiter is recruiting oranges, and then an apple comes along the way, and if it's an obvious apple, it's an immediate rejection of the candidate. But if the apple pretends to look like an orange, they can at least get a chance of being interviewed for an orange role. So this is the context. So with your metaphor, I am an apple searching for an orange role. So my strategy is to highlight some orange-related small tasks that I have overtaken in the past, although I don't have real experience as an orange. My question is if it makes sense to mention my successes related to apples. Now, if the apple successes can be transferred to the orange area because they demonstrate leadership or management or something, then why not? So yes, use it if it's relevant. Then I have one more question. I worked on many companies precisely for 18 to 22 months. So that's a year and a half to not even 2 years in each of them. This is something I cannot change. I do have reasonable explanations about the reasons to change each jobs. How do you convince the potential employer that I want to stay for at least 3 to 4 years in the new company? Well, one thing, I would look at the CV and see if there is a way to either combine some of the entries or do without one of them. If that is not possible and there are reasons outside your own scope for why you changed, for example, the company went bankrupt, they exited the market, there was restructuring, etc., you can add on the CV under the date, reason for leaving, restructuring, reason for leaving, change in strategy, bankruptcy, exited the market, etc. So this will already increase the likelihood for people to at least invite you to an interview. And if they have invited you to an interview, it already means they might not be bothered with the relatively frequent changes. So then you can use the talk to the skeptic before they speak to you strategy and go ahead in, and maybe not in the first one, but second or third, say, listen, I know it looks like I change jobs very often, but believe me, because of that, I do want to stay in one place for longer. And if you want to, I can now walk you through why those changes have looked like they currently look like. So I hope that answers your question, Maciej. Then I have, okay, Dorota, I'm happy that I helped you. Matteo, how can we answer how would you see yourself in the next 5, 7, 10 years? I think it is the most tricky question, as the recruiter can see you as arrogant or weak, or maybe you don't want to disclose your goal. For example, to be an entrepreneur. And this was also one of the questions, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Now, this is the only question, I believe, that I would answer strategically without disclosing the truth. Because the only thing they want to know is, will you predictably stay in the role? If somebody asks you, where do you see yourself in 10 years? It is absolutely okay to say, listen, the market is currently so volatile, I don't think it's reasonable to make 10-year predictions. But if you ask me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? The only correct answer would be to say, I see myself in the company I'm currently recruiting for. I hope that in 5 years, I will still be with the same employer. And then depending on your level that you currently are, you can say, I would see myself in the same or similar or higher position. And this is the only question where I don't want to say nobody wants to hear the truth, especially, for example, if you want to become an entrepreneur. Here, this is the only question where you give a predictable answer and you stick to that. In 5 years, I want to be where I'm in the company, what I just said. I hope that makes sense, Matteo. Next question. The way I'm looking is because I see only light gray. Gunilla, I have already been terminated and exempted since March, but I'm still employed. How do I deal with this in the interview regarding my current situation? Should I mention it openly or pretend that I'm still working? That's a good question. March. So on your CV, on your LinkedIn profile, etc., I would definitely, it's not about pretending that you're still working, but reflecting your contract status. So I definitely say that you're still with them. And if you're specifically asked about your situation, you then say, well, because of the coronavirus, I've been terminated. I still have 2 months, but I've been exempted from work, so I can start any time the next 6 weeks, for example. So here I would differentiate pretending to be working versus actual contract status. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Do you have any other questions? We still have 8 minutes. I'm here for you, so interview questions can be tricky, so I'm here to answer all and any of them. Okay, good. In the meantime, while others are typing up their questions, I'm curious, how did you find out about the open webinars? Was it Facebook, LinkedIn? Somebody recommended it? I'm actually curious. Okay, LinkedIn. Okay, VU Executive Academy, LinkedIn recommended. Okay, that's the power of LinkedIn. I can see recommendation. Okay, the power of LinkedIn and networking, I can see. Okay. Xenia, you're very welcome. Yes, you're all very welcome. Do you have any questions, last questions on interviews or general job search? I know this is one of the most common comments that we've received in the past, that our webinars are super intensive and that there's so much know-how in 2 hours that most take notes like on several pieces of paper. I know it's a lot and that there is a lot of to digest. If you have any questions, generally, I mean, this is the last time for now that we're talking. So if you have any, we still have 5 minutes, any overall job search questions, obvious job, any job search questions, then let me know. Maja says you don't talk about obvious things too much, so thank you. Job search or interviewing questions, everything is more than welcome. In the meantime, also, while I still have you, because this is the last webinar, Marcelina will mention that also in the email, we'd like to summarize the second edition. So if you could then by email answer 3 questions about how you liked the webinar, what you've learned during those sessions, we'd very much appreciate that. Hold on, my IT support is coughing and needs my glass of water. It's completely red. Poor him. So thank you also to my IT support. Okay. Yeah, so if you could share after the webinar as well why these sessions have been useful, who you recommend them to, why they should listen at least to the recording, I'd very, very, very much appreciate that. Okay, 5 more minutes to go. No more questions. Really, no more questions. Okay. Oh, do you still plan any future webinars? That's why I said not yet. It might be the last time with Might. We will not do those editions again. So this is definitely the last edition. We do have recordings of 2 editions. What we're thinking about doing is once every about 3 weeks to have something relevant on the job market, be it like take out, because the last, I mean, we did spend together about 8 hours. So as you can see, those 8 hours have been very intensive and very practical and a big overview, but there are things that can be explained in much more detail and in much more complexity. So we might pick out little things here and there to show how much more there is when it comes to data, when it comes to trends, what's happening, what works, what doesn't work. So yeah, we might continue. We might continue every about 3 weeks, 4 weeks with something a bit more specific. Okay. Well, then actually to wrap this up, I have one last question to you. What is your most important takeaway after today's session? Why was it worth listening? Just for me also to know that was valuable to spend 2 hours now with you. So what are your takeaway points, insights? What surprised you? What's, yeah. How to answer questions strategically. Answers to standard questions. Okay. Knowing the other part and to prepare. Practicing difficult questions. I think with interviewing, especially with interviewing, It's important to put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer to understand what is the role. Is it a headhunter who needs arguments to put you forward as a shortlisted candidate? Is it HR who needs to verify the cultural fit? Is it business who needs to hear concrete solutions? And yeah, looking at it from the other side helps you prepare as a candidate. Anticipate skeptics. Yes, I like that. Learn info from the interview too. Yeah, I think especially for those who interview a lot with headhunters, I mean, the first 2 or 3 interviews are exciting, and then you can see there is a repetitiveness to the questions and to all the interviews, and it gets boring, especially if you have 5, 10, 15 interviews. So making sure that you as a candidate also get something out of those interviews is super important. So I'm glad you took that out, Simona. Star and interview trainer app. Yes, this is new. Differentiating interviews as a winner, not only as a participant, packing USP in the first moments. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm happy that you're walking away with important insights. I hope to be in touch with you. Find me on LinkedIn. You can find my colleague Anne on LinkedIn. Please do say thank you to Marcelina. I want to surprise her with that. Send her a thank you for organizing a webinar at careerangels.eu. I know you can see at what time she sends emails out sometimes. So just if you could drop her a little thank you note, that I'd appreciate it a lot. So thanks again, and I hope we'll be in touch, and I'll see you again in the future. Have a lovely, lovely afternoon. Bye.
Hi, thank you for watching our material. If you found it interesting and you'd like to see more, subscribe below. If you do not want to watch recordings but actually want to join live, find us on Facebook. See you next time.